بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم وبعد. To continue inshallah with Al-Muhadhab min Ihya Ulumuddin by Hujjatul Islam Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala wa radi'an, and the Muhadhab being Al-Shaykh Salih Al-Shami rahimahullah ta'ala hayyan وميتا. And we have arrived at Al-Kitab Al-Ashir Tartib Al-Awradi wa Ihya Al-Layl, the 10th book from the 40 books of Al-Ihya. As Imam Al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala, he authored 40 smaller books which made up the total Ihya Ulumuddin. And so alhamdulillah, we've arrived at the 10th, which is Tartib Al-Awradi wa Ihya Al-Layl. So Tartib al-Awrad, the ordering of al-Awrad. Al-Awrad is the plural of wird, and a wird is basically a daily act or a daily portion of an act of obedience, an act of servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so today, usually, a person uses the term wird for wird of the Quran or wird of Adhkar and so on and so forth. And so here he's speaking about awrad, which relate to actions. So daily actions that a person schedules in to his everyday living and the organization of these actions. And so this chapter is very, very important, and it gives insight into the way that the awliya of the past would try to live. And many of the ulama, when we say ulama, real ulama, not students of knowledge, not those who adorn themselves with the clothing of talabul ilm and so on and so forth, but actual ulama, they live it like this. He says, wa ihya'ul layl. And likewise, the concept of ihya'ul layl is going to be discussed. And ihya'ul layl means giving life to the night. Why? Because a person, when they pray the night, they're giving life to it in the sense that on Yawm al-Qiyamah, there's going to be reward for them. And so they are extracting benefits from that time, the night time. He says, At-Tamheed, so the introduction to this section, إن الله تعالى جعل الأرض ذلولا لعباده لا ليستقروا في مناكبها بل ليتخذوها منزلا فيتزودوا منها زادا يحملهم في سفرهم إلى أوطانهم. So now this introduction is it's a beautiful kind of I don't know what to call it, maqala. So he's kind of put together a few paragraphs, and it's a bit longer in the original Ihya, and he's basically summarizing what this life is, and he's summarizing the perception of a person who understands what this life is should be. He says Allah Azza wa Jal has made this earth that we live upon as tractable and subservient to man, meaning we can manage it. We're able to manage this earth. We can build upon it. We can move it. We can shift it. We can break it apart. It's very manageable and tractable, and it's subservient to us. The earth serves our needs. Allah has created the earth to serve our needs. We can extract from it and so on and so forth. And likewise, the rest of creation has been created to serve the needs of man. As this place here, this dar that we find ourselves in, it is a place of being tested. And all of the things that are contained within this life, they are means and mediums that we can use for the sake of passing this test. He says, لا ليستقروا في مناكبها, not so that they can find permanent residency in its desirable places, the hilltops or the crevices, the valleys. That's not the purpose of this earth, which has become the purpose today. Today, many, they dream about purchasing a nice house in a nice place, surrounded by the lush of greenery and rivers and lakes and so on and so forth, mountain tops, etc. He says, بَلْ يَتَّخِذُوهَا مَنْزِلًا. Rather, this earth has been created for us so that we can take it as a station, a temporary station. He says, فَيَتَزَوَّدُوا مِنْهَا زَادًا يَحْمِلُهُمْ فِي سَفَرِهِمْ إِلَى أَوْطَانِهِمْ. And so they take from that station that which they need of zad. And zad it basically means, that which you take on your journey, on your travels. So everything you need for your journey, it's referred to as zad. that allows them to complete their journey and arrive at, he says, awtanihim, their final places of abode. And he's going to talk about the final places of abode shortly. But in brief, the final places of abode, one of two, Jannah or Jahannam. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. He says, فَالنَّاسُ فِي هَذَا الْعَالَمِ سَفْرٌ وَأَوَّلُ مَنَازِلِهِمَ الْمَهْدِ. He says, so people in this life, people on this earth, people in this realm within which we currently occupy, they are travelers. And the first station that they find themselves in is al-mahd, the cradle. He says, وَآخِرُهَا اللَّحْدِ. And the last of the stations that the person will find him or herself within, the grave. So from the cradle to the grave, every part, every station, every place that we find ourselves in is simply a station along the way. He says, وَالْوَطْنُ هُوَ الْجَنَّةِ أَوِ النَّارِ. And the final abode, al-watn, is al-jannah aw al-nar. And today, perhaps a side point, and not to go off on a tangent too much, but today we have an issue called al-wataniyya. We have this issue al-qawmiyya. A person, we have individuals who have become very affiliated and attached to the pieces of land from which they came. And likewise, people that become attached to the colors of their skins or to the tribes from which they have been born. And these things are irrelevant. On Yawm al-Qiyamah, a person is not going to be raised as a British person or an English person or a Welsh person or an Irish person or an African of whichever part, region, or an Arab or a Persian or an Asian. A person is going to be raised as a believer, as a hypocrite, and as a disbeliever. One of three. Those are the only three. It's not black and white, yellow and brown. It's believer, non-believer, hypocrite. One of three. It's not male, female, believer, non-believer, hypocrite. One of three. All of these things, these identities that we've attached ourselves with today, during this identity crisis that we find ourselves within, they're all irrelevant. And here in this earth, we are being tested. From the cradle to the grave, as Imam Ghazali, he says, وَالْوَطَنُ هُوَ الْجَنَّةِ أَوِ النَّارِ. And the final abode is paradise or hellfire. وَالْعُمْرُ مَسَافَةُ السَّفَرِ. And one's life is the distance that he will travel. Some people, they travel for 80 years. Some people, they travel for 70. Some 37. Some 49. Some, they don't even travel an hour in this life. Their travel ends before it even starts. They don't leave the womb. Some, they travel for a year. They pass away, they transition into the next life in infancy. The lifespan that we have is the distance that we will be traveling in this life. He says, فَسِنُوهُ مَرَاحِلُهُ وَشُهُورُهُ فَرَاسِخُهُ وَأَيَّامُهُ أَمْيَالُهُ. He says, and so the years that a person lives, they are simply the phases of travel. He says, وَشُهُورُهُ فَرَاسِخُهُ. And the months within those years, they are simply the milestones within each phase, or phases within a phase. Stations in between stations. He says, وَأَيَّامُهُ أَمْيَالُهُ. And the days within the months, they are simply like the miles, the kilometers in between the milestones. So you have the years, which are the phases of travel. And then you have the months, which are the milestones between those phases. For example, someone hits 30. The average age of our ummah is what? About 60 to 70 years. Someone hits 30, 35. They've hit the milestone of midlife. Someone hits 60. They've hit the milestone of, I'm returning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala soon in accordance to the average age. Someone, for example, becomes sick with a terminal illness. They've hit a milestone. My time on this earth is coming to an end. And so all of these phases, they have milestones, signs that allow us to know. When you're driving and you see 100 miles left to this particular city, they're like milestones for us. He says, وَأَنْفَاسُهُ خُطُوَاتُهُ. And the breaths that he breathes whilst he's traveling, they're simply the steps that he is taking. Every single breath as it expires, is a step taken closer to the final abode. He says, وَطَاعَتُهُ بِضَاعَتُهُ. And as he travels, as you travel, you collect commodities, you collect things, you purchase things. And those things, you take them with you to your final home, your final abode. He says, طَاعَتُهُ بِضَاعَتُهُ. The commodities that this person, as he or she is traveling, collects are the ta'ah, the acts of worship. The acts of worship that you engage in as you traverse the path of this life, they are the commodities that you are going to take with you into the next life. And so some on Yawm al-Qiyamah, they will come and they will have a shipload of commodities. Some will come and they will have nothing. Some will come, they have something, but by the end of their judgment, they're at minus. They pray the nights, they fast the days, but they backbite and slander. He says, وَأَوْقَاتُهُ رُؤُوسُ أَمْوَالِهِ. And the time that he has on that journey, on the travel, is the capital of his wealth. Time is capital. And many of us, we take this for granted. We worry about wealth, not realizing that true wealth is what? Time. Time. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, he said, تَعَلَّمُوا قَبْلَ أَن تَسُودُوا. He said, learn before you become leaders, before you find yourselves in positions of leadership. Why? Because when you have responsibility, you don't have the time to learn anymore. And when you become a person who has a family, your time for learning is reduced greatly. As you get older, your time for learning is reduced. The greatest time that a person has is the time of youth. Why? No responsibilities. And subhanallah, these wicked people, whether individuals or corporations, who do they try to focus on? Who do they try to waste the time of? Youth. How many a young person has wasted months, some even years, playing on a computer game? Imagine how many they've wasted months, years on reading nonsense. It's the youth are targeted by these wicked and corrupt individuals, corporations, etc. But it's not to suggest that once a person moves out of the period of youth, that his time is up and there's no value to his time. No, there is value to the time in accordance to what we make of it. And so a person may live for 2 years and he makes of his time that which a person does not make in 20 years. Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, he lived for 45 years. Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala, he lived for 55 years. If you were to get 10 people that lived 55 years each, it would be quite difficult, if not impossible, for them to produce the likes of what Imam al-Ghazali and Imam al-Nawawi have produced. In fact, some of the works of Imam al-Ghazali, Imam al-Nawawi, amongst others, some of these works, nearly impossible to repeat today. But they lived for shorter times than many. And you have individuals, they live for 90, 100 years. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you find the oppressors live for long times. You find oppressors, they live for long lives in oppression. Why? The evidences against them on Yawm al-Qiyamah are going to be greater. He says, and it could be just an hour that a person needs to turn his life into something valuable. 1 hour, 1 minute. The shaheed, it's a minute, a moment in which he faces death, but then he acquires one of the highest places in paradise. It's not the entire life, it's just a moment in that life. He says, وَأَوْقَاتُهُ رُؤُوسُ أَمْوَالِهِ, and his time, the capital of his wealth. وَشَهَوَاتُهُ وَأَغْرَاضُهُ قُطَاعُ طَرِيقِهِ. You're traveling with this wealth. You're traveling with these commodities. He says, but his desires and his aspirations, they are the robbers, the road robbers on the path that await him. You're traversing the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you have with you these commodities that you've acquired through your worship. You have with you time, which is the capital of your wealth. Who's waiting for you? Who's waiting to steal these things from you? Your own self, your desires and your ambitions. He says, وَرِبْحُهُ الْفَوْزُ بِلِقَاءِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى فِي دَارِ السَّلَامِ مَعَ الْمُلْكِ الْكَبِيرِ وَالنَّعِيمِ الْمُقِيمِ. He says, And his prophet, the prophet that he is trying to acquire, is to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fi dar as-salam, in the eternal abode of as-salam, peace, tranquility, ma'al mulk al-kabir, with great jurisdiction, his own, a great kingdom that will belong to him, his own. The person who acquires the least position in Jannah, what does he acquire? Who knows? 10 times this earth. 10 times the dunya. Is it only the earth? Allah knows best. But 10 times. If we say 10 times this earth, that's sufficient. That's the least. The least. So how foolish are we to sell that for a second or two of pleasure in this life? It's foolishness. He says, وَخُسْرَانُهُ الْبُعْدُ مِنَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. And his loss is that he will be distanced from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's what we're trying to acquire. That's what are we bartering for? What are we trying to acquire? We have capital. What's our capital? Our time. The profit that we can earn ourselves is to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in paradise. But the loss that we can earn ourselves with our capital, if we don't invest it properly, is what? Hellfire. Whether temporarily or eternally. Temporarily is enough. The inhabitants of hellfire will wish for death. They will wish for death because of the severity of the punishment, and it won't come. He says, فَالْغَافِلُ فِي نَفَسٍ مِّنْ أَنْفَاسِهِ حَتَّى يَنْقَضِي فِي غَيْرِ طَاعَةٍ تُقَرِّبُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ زُلْفَى مُتَعَرِّضٌ فِي يَوْمِ التَّغَابُنِ لِحَسْرَةٍ مَا لَهَا مُنْتَهَى. He says, and so the ghafil, the person who is aloof, the person who is not aware of the reality of this life, he wastes his breath until it expires. He wastes his breath until it expires in that which is not pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This person, he is putting himself in a position on Yawm al-Qiyamah where he is going to face loss and regret that has no end. The people of Jannah, they will regret the times wherein they did not worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what about the people of Nar? So, understanding what the purpose of this life is. The importance cannot be, expressed. Of course, this life is a test. That's it. It's a test. The only reason we're here, to be tested. We're not here to acquire the material gains of this life. This dunya is fleeting. As the Prophet ﷺ said, if this dunya was worth anything, the non-Muslim would not be given a sip of water within this life. This life compared to the akhirah, there's no comparison. He says, وَلِهَذَا الْخَطْرُ الْعَظِيمُ وَالْخَطْبُ الْهَائِلُ شَمَّرَ الْمُوَفَّقُونَ عَنْ سَاقِ الْجَدِّ وَوَدَّعُوا بِالْكُلِّيَّةِ مَلَاذَ النَّفْسِ. He says, and due to the importance, the immense importance, the immense danger of this matter, this issue, شَمَّرَ الْمُوَفَّقُونَ عَنْ سَاقِ الْجَدِّ. Those who were granted success by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they exerted all effort. And what else? وَوَدَّعُوا مَلَاذَ النَّفْسِ بِالْكُلِّيَّةِ. And they said goodbye to the pleasures of the nafs. Gratification of the nafs, gratification of the self. وَدَّعُوهَا. They said goodbye. Al-wida'. What's al-wida'? Khutbatul wida' of the Prophet ﷺ, the final farewell. They said farewell to gratification of the self. They said, Assalamu alaikum, to the desires of the stomach and the private part, and desires of status and fame and so on and so forth. Why? Because they understood the severity of what we're facing. He says, وَاغْتَنَمُوا بَقَايَ الْعُمَرِ. And they benefited from that which was remaining of their lives when they came to understand. He says, وَرَتَّبُوا بِحَسَبِ تَكْرَارِ الْأَوْقَاتِ وَظَائِفَ الْأَوْرَادِ حِرْصًا عَلَى إِحْيَاءِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ. He says, and they organized and they ordered their days and their nights, and they portioned within each part of their day and their night devotional acts. Devotional acts. Why? He says, في طلب القرب من الملك الجبار والسعي إلى دار القرار. Because they were seeking closeness from Al-Malik al-Jabbar, Allah Azza wa Jal. And they were trying to acquire an abode in the eternal abodes of paradise. He says, وَيَتَّضِحُ هَذَا بِذِكْرِ بَابَيْنِ الباب الأول في فضيلة الأوراد وترتيبها في الليل والنهار الباب الثاني في كيفية إحياء الليل وفضيلته وما يتعلق به. He says, and this will become clear for us. We're going to look at how to do this basically. The first is the virtue of having portioned devotional acts of worship. What does it mean to have awrad? He says, وَتَرْتِيبُهَا, and how to organize them in accordance to the day and the night. And this is something which many people don't have. Many people, they don't have any organized acts of devotion. What is meant by this? For example, a person says, I'm going to read one juz of the Quran every day. That's called a wird. That's a daily portion, a daily act which you are devoted to. Or someone says, I'm going to pray 8 rak'at, 10 rak'at. Some of the Salaf al-Salih, they would pray over 300 rak'at, 500 rak'at per night. Having a daily portion. And a person, unfortunately we have immature individuals who have not really studied much, and they'll say, but isn't this bid'ah? Isn't this innovation? It's not innovation. It's innovation if you are inventing acts of worship. But this is organizing your day and your night with acts of worship. There's no issue there. He says, الباب الأول فضيلة الأوراد وترتيبها وأحكامها. So now he's going to speak about the virtue of having portioned acts of devotional worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala throughout your day and your night. He says, اعلم أن الناظرين بنور البصيرة علموا أنه لا نجاة إلا في لقاء الله تعالى وبأن يموت العبد محبا لله تعالى وعارفا به سبحانه. He says, know that الناظرين بنور البصيرة, those who have looked at life بنور البصيرة, with the light of true perception. And we spoke about this issue before. We said there is a difference between seeing and perceiving. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, there are individuals that see but they do not perceive. In Arabic, you could say, رأيت وبصرت. الرؤيا is different from basira. To see something is different than perceiving something. So he's saying those who have looked to this life بنور البصيرة, with the light of true perception, علموا أنه لا نجاة إلا في لقاء الله تعالى. They came to know that there is no success, there is no savior except in the meeting of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. بأن يموت العبد, how so? That a slave, a servant of Allah passes away, transitions from this life, محبا لله تعالى, and he loves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وعارفا به, and he knows him subhanahu. Al-Arifu billah is the one who knows Allah, not knows him theologically and theoretically, but knows him in his life. A person who knows Allah in his life, who interacts with Allah in his daily life. He says, وَأَنَّ الْمَحَبَّةَ وَالْأُنْسَ لَا تَحْصُلُ إِلَّا مِنْ دَوَامِ ذِكْرِ الْمَحْبُوبِ وَالْمُوَاظَبَةِ عَلَيْهِ. And he knows that love and closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or to anyone really, he says, لا تحصل, does not take place إلا من دوام الذكر أو دوام ذكر المحبوب والمواظبة عليه. It doesn't take place unless a person is consistent in remembering the one whom he or she wants to love, and does this constantly. He says, وَأَنَّ الْمَعْرِفَةَ بِهِ لَا تَحْصُلُ إِلَّا بِدَوَامِ الْفِكْرِ فِيهِ. And knowing Allah does not take place except that a person is always thinking about Allah. And this tells us that what Imam Ghazali means by ma'rifatullah, al-arifu billah, is not theological and theoretical knowledge of Allah. It's knowing Allah in his everyday life. How so? He's thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all the time. What does that look like? Thinking about Allah before his actions. Thinking about Allah when he's in need. Thinking about Allah when he's in a sense of strength. Thinking about Allah when he's interacting with others. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always on his mind. It's a constant relationship with Allah. This is ma'rifatullah, to know Allah. He says, وَفِي صِفَاتِهِ وَأَفْعَالِهِ, and to be consistent in thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his names and his attributes. But again, what does it mean? It's not the theoretical names and attributes, the conversations. No, it's knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, thinking about him, his names and his attributes in everyday life. For example, I'm poor. Allah is Ar-Razaq. Hasbi Allah wa ni'mal wakeel. I'm weak, Allah is the one that grants strength. I'm lost, Allah is the one that guides, and so on and so forth. He says, وَالنَّفْسُ لِمَا جُبِلَتْ عَلَيْهِ مِنَ السَّآمَةِ وَالْمَلَالِ لا تصبر على فن واحد من الأسباب المعينة على الذكر والفكر. He says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created the nafs. The nafs, is basically the soul, or the inner person, the inner, whatever you want to call it. He says that this has been created in a way which it becomes easily bored and finds discontentment quite easily. It's very easy for the nafs to become bored. He says, لا تصبر على فن واحد. For this reason, the nafs, it's not patient upon one way over another in trying to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and reflect over Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, فَمِن ضَرُورَةِ اللُّطْفِ بِهَا أَن تَرَوَّحَ بِالتَّنَقُّلِ مِنْ فَنٍ إِلَى فَنٍ. He says, and so in order to be latif with your soul, to be soft and to, treat yourself correctly, it's important that you give yourself respite by interchanging between different acts of devotion. Don't try to stand and pray all day. No, have different acts of devotion. He says, فَلِذَلِكَ تُقَسِّمُ الْأَوْرَادِ. And for this reason, you portion your day in different acts of worship. فَهَذَا مَنْ كَشَفَ لِلنَّاظِرِينَ بِنُورِ الْبَصِيرَةِ. And so this is what the people of true perception came to understand. This was revealed to them. They came to understand this issue. فَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ مِنْ أَهْلِهِ فَانْظُرْ إِلَى خِطَابِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى لِرَسُولِهِ. He says, if you are not from those people, i.e. the people that are able to see and understand this, he says, then look at the khitab of Allah to His Messenger. Look at what Allah has instructed His Messenger with. Where? In the Quran. وَاقْتَبِسْهُ بِنُورِ الْإِيمَانِ. And when you listen and you look at what Allah has instructed His Prophet towards, try to understand it with the light of Iman. He says, فَقَدْ قَالَ تَعَالَى لِأَقْرَبِ عِبَادِهِ إِلَيْهِ وَأَرْفَعِهِمْ دَرَجَةً لَدَيْهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to the closest of servants to Him, who? The Prophet ﷺ. وَأَرْفَعِهِمْ دَرَجَةً لَدَيْهِ. And the one who has the highest position with Him. He says, إِنَّ لَكَ فِي النَّهَارِ سَبْحًا طَوِيلًا. You have in the day a lengthy task, a lengthy duty, calling people to Islam. The duty, the responsibility of prophecy. It's a lengthy one, a hard one, a difficult one. وَاذْكُرِ اسْمَ رَبِّكَ وَتَبَتَّلْ إِلَيْهِ تَبْتِيلًا. And be often in remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and devoting yourself to Him in a way which is befitting and devotional in the sense you exert effort in doing so. وَقَالَ تَعَالَى وَاذْكُرِ اسْمَ رَبِّكَ بُكْرَةً وَأَصِيلًا. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructed His Prophet ﷺ, said, and remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the mornings and in the evenings. وَمِنَ اللَّيْلِ فَاسْجُدْ لَهُ وَسَبِّحْهُ لَيْلًا طَوِيلًا. And at night time, be from those who prostrate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and remember Him. لَيْلًا طَوِيلًا. Give this a lengthy portion of your night. وَقَالَ تَعَالَى وَسَبِّحْ بِحَمْدِ رَبِّكَ قَبْلَ طُلُوعِ الشَّمْسِ وَقَبْلَ الْغُرُوبِ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, and remember Allah Azza wa Jal before the rising of the sun and before the setting of the sun. وَمِنَ اللَّيْلِ فَسَبِّحْهُ وَأَدْبَارَ السُّجُودِ. And likewise at night time, remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and after as-sujood. And sujood would be what? After what? After the salah. He says, ثم انظر كيف وصف الفائزين من عباده وبماذا وصفهم فقال تعالى تتجافى جنوبهم عن المضاجع يدعون ربهم خوفا وطمعا. Then he says, and look at how Allah describes those who are successful from His servants. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says about them تتجافى جنوبهم عن المضاجع, that their sides are separated from the places of resting, i.e. they are not in their beds. يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُمْ أو يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُمْ خَوْفًا وَطَمَعًا. They call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a state of fear and in a state of want and hope. فهذا كله يبين لك أن الطريق إلى الله هو مراقبة الأوقات وعمارتها بالأوراد على سبيل الدوام. He says, and this should show you that the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one which is basically a lifestyle which is portioned with acts of worship, and a lifestyle where a person is supervising his or her time. So a person knows how they're using their time. I know what I'm going to do in the morning. I know what I'm going to do in the evening. With worship, no idle time. It's not time to just sit around and lay around and be lazy. No, it's in the morning I have free time. I'm going to fill it with reciting the Quran. Going to fill it with dhikr. But in the evening I have this free time. I'm going to fill it with this. I'm going to fill it with that. Night time I'm going to have a portion of qiyam, and so on and so forth. And he's going to give us some examples. He says, أوراد النهار الورد الأول. So he's going to go through some of the portions of devotional acts that we can apply within our everyday lives, and we will look at that inshallah next week bi'idhnillah. And so what we have to do this week, so that next week we arrive and we are ready to try to implement what we're going to hear, because if we do implement what we're going to hear, it will change our lives. As bi'idhnillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant us the ability to become from al-amilin, those who act, those who implement, al-abidin, al-muwaffaqin. We hope to be from these people. We want to adorn ourselves with the things that Imam al-Ghazali is instructing us toward. We don't want to just read it and go home and we feel good for a few hours. No, we want to implement it. And so make the intention this week that I am going to try, because now comes the amal part of this book. We're starting to get into some of the amal. And so we want to try to implement it, inshallah, bi'idhnillah. And so just to summarize before we conclude, Al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala radi'an, he says that this life is a test. And the years that we spend in this life, they are phases of the journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the months are milestones within the phases of our travel. And the days, they are the kilometers or the miles within the daily distances that we travel, and the breaths that we take are our steps. And our capital, the capital of our wealth, is our time. And the road robbers waiting for us on the path, our desires and our ambitions. Because ambitions and desires are often linked. And too much ambition is problematic, because usually ambition is centered around what? Dunya. Dunya. And today we live in a time where every person wants to be an entrepreneur, a millionaire, and so on and so on. These are ambitions, and they are misplaced ambitions. The real ambition should be, as Imam al-Ghazali, he says, the final abode, Jannah. Because the final abode will be one of two, Jannah or Jahannam. And how we use our capital wealth, it will lead us to one of these two final abodes. And so we don't have much time left. Every single person, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written death for, and death is coming. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, كُلُّ نَفْسٍ ذَائِقَةُ الْمَوْتِ ثُمَّ إِلَيْنَا تُرْجَعُونَ. Every single soul shall taste death, and to us, i.e. to Allah, you will return. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he tells us, the ones who have iman and amal, they will be in places of paradise. And as we said, the least person in paradise will have 10 times this dunya. 10 times this dunya. And so we have to start to think about our lives and try to utilize the time that we have left. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from those that utilize our time, our years, our days, our months. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us our sins. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from al-amilin, al-muqarrabin ilay, al-mukhlisin, al-mukhlasin. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad.